but on the golf course caddying, teaching himself the game. Then on December 1st, 1956, his 17th birthday.
From winning 6 major championships to being struck by lightning out on the course, Lee Trevino has certainly experienced.
There is a kind of competitor that the system of professional golf was never designed to produce. The system produces players who come from country clubs and private lessons and carefully manage development pathways that move them from junior golf to college golf to the professional tour in a straight and supervised line. Lee Trevino did not come from that system. He came from a dirt floor shack outside Dallas with no electricity and no running water, and he learned to play golf by hustling bets on a municipal course with a taped-up club wrapped in electrical tape. When he arrived on the PGA Tour, he was already something nobody there had seen before and nobody there knew how to handle. That was before he started winning. Once he started winning, the problem became something else entirely. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. The numbers that made no sense to anyone. To understand what Lee Trevino did to the players who competed against him, you first need to understand what he produced on the scorecard, because the numbers sit inside a context that makes them significantly more remarkable than they appear when listed without that context attached. Trevino won 29 PGA Tour events across a career that began in genuine poverty and developed without any of the infrastructure that produced most of his contemporaries. He won 6 major championships, 2 U.S. Opens, 2 Open Championships, 2 PGA Championships. He won the U.S. Open in 1968 as a virtually unknown player who had qualified through sectional qualifying and who most of the field had never heard of before the week began. He shot 4 rounds in the 60s at Oak Hill and beat Jack Nicklaus by 4 shots in what remains one of the most unexpected major championship victories in the history of the sport. Then he came back the following year and finished second. Then in 1971, he beat Nicklaus again in a playoff at Marion to win his second U.S. Open. That same year, he won the Canadian Open and the Open Championship within the space of 3 weeks, 3 national opens in 1 month. Raymond Floyd, who competed against Trevino throughout his peak years, said that the 1971 summer made every serious player on tour stop and genuinely reconsider what they thought they understood about what a hot competitive streak in professional golf was capable of looking like when it was operating at its absolute maximum. What made Trevino different from every other great player. Every generation of professional golf produces players who win through talent and preparation and mental discipline. What Trevino produced was something that operated through all of those things and also through something that his contemporaries could not locate in themselves or in anyone else they had competed against. He made golf look like it was not supposed to be taken as seriously as everyone else was taking it, and then he beat everyone who was taking it seriously with a consistency that left the serious men standing around wondering what they had missed. The swing was the first thing everyone noticed and the first thing that confused them. Trevino played with a pronounced left-to-right ball flight produced by a swing that no instructor of that era would have built deliberately, and that most instructors of that era would have immediately tried to fix if they had encountered it in the student. The swing was flat. The face was open through impact. The ball started left and moved right and landed softly and went where Trevino intended it to go with a consistency that made the unconventional method feel more reliable than the orthodox methods everyone else had spent their careers constructing and protecting. Ben Hogan, who understood the mechanics of the golf swing at a level that very few people in the history of the game have matched, said that Trevino was the only player he ever saw who could afford to have that swing at that level of competition. Hogan said the swing should not work as reliably as it worked, and that the fact that it did work that reliably told you something important about the quality of the athletic mind operating inside it. That was not a casual observation from Hogan. That was a precise man acknowledging that something was functioning outside the boundaries of what his precision had defined as possible. The talking was part of the weapon Lee Trevino talked on the golf course. He talked to his playing partners, into the galleries, into his caddy, and to himself, and to anyone within range of his voice, and the talking never stopped regardless of what was happening on scorecard or what the competitive situation was demanding from him in terms of focus and concentration. Every other great player of his era treated the golf course as a place where internal silence was the prerequisite for performance. Trevino treated it as a place where the conversation simply continued because the conversation was part of how he functioned and part of how he competed. Jack Nicklaus, who processed competition through a focused internal quiet that he constructed carefully around himself, said that playing with Trevino was unlike playing with any other competitor he encountered across his entire career. Nicholas said the talking created a surface-level impression that Trevino was relaxed and unconcerned with the competitive situation in a way that made you feel slightly foolish for being as focused and as serious as you were. Then, Trevino would hit a shot that reminded you that the relaxation was genuine, and the quality was also genuine. And those two things were not in conflict with each other the way they would have been in conflict in almost anyone else standing on the same golf course. Tom Weiskopf, who was one of the most talented players of his generation and who competed against Trevino throughout the 1970s, said that the talking got inside your preparation in ways that were difficult to defend against, because defending against it required you to build a wall, and building the wall used mental energy that you needed for other things. Weiskopf said Trevino was not talking to distract you deliberately. He was talking because that was who he was. But the effect of who he was on the people competing against him was a distraction, regardless of whether it was intended as one. And there was no clean solution to the problem it created. Where the fearlessness actually came from, Lee Trevino grew up in a house with a dirt floor outside Dallas, Texas, raised by his mother and his grandfather, who worked as a gravedigger. He had no access to private instruction or country club facilities or the developmental pathway that produced most of his contemporaries on the PGA Tour. He learned to play golf on a municipal course in El Paso, where he worked as an assistant and where he supplemented his income by hustling money games against anyone willing to bet against him. He played those money games with a taped-up Dr. Pepper bottle wrapped to a club shaft, and he won them with enough consistency to build a reputation that eventually led him toward the professional tour. That background produced a competitor whose relationship with pressure was formed by experiences that had nothing to do with golf tournaments or major championships or world rankings. Trevino had competed for money he needed in situations where losing had real consequences that extended beyond a scorecard. By the time he arrived at a U.S. Open, the pressure available in that environment was genuinely smaller than pressure he had already navigated and survived. Gary Player, who competed against Trevino across multiple decades and who understood the psychology of competition from deep personal experience, said that Trevino carried a freedom onto the golf course that most players spent their entire careers trying to manufacture through mental techniques and pre-shot routines, and that Trevino simply had because of where he had come from and what that origin had required of him before golf was ever part of the conversation. Arnold Palmer, who had built his own career on a foundation of fearless aggression and crowd connection, said that Trevino was the only player of his era who reminded him of himself in terms of the relationship between authentic personality and competitive performance. Palmer said most great players constructed a competitive version of themselves that was different from their natural self, and that construction required maintenance and could break down under pressure. Trevino had no constructed version. What you saw on the golf course was what existed everywhere else in his life, and that authenticity was structurally more durable than anything built on performance. What the greatest players said when they were honest. Jack Nicklaus said that Trevino was the player he feared most at the U.S. Open during the years when both of them were competing at their peak. That statement from Nicklaus requires a moment to absorb fully, because Nicklaus won 4 U.S. Opens and competed in the event with a consistency and a record that placed him as the standard every other player was measured against. For Nicklaus to identify one specific player as his greatest fear at that specific tournament was not false modesty. It was an honest assessment from a man who did not offer those assessments casually or without the evidence to support them. Tom Watson, who won 8 major championships and who competed against Trevino during the most competitive era the sport had produced in decades, said that Trevino was the most naturally gifted improviser he ever competed against. Watson said most great players at the top of the game had developed reliable patterns and trusted those patterns under pressure. Trevino trusted his instincts instead of his patterns, and his instincts were so accurate, so consistently that the results were indistinguishable from the results produced by the most disciplined, pattern-based competitors in the field. Watson said that combination of instinct operating at that level of accuracy over that sustained period of time was something he never saw replicated in anyone else he competed against across his entire career. Hale Irwin, who won 3 U.S. Opens and who was one of the most analytically precise competitors of his generation, said that Trevino made him reconsider what the prerequisites for greatness in professional golf actually were. Irwin said he had built his career on a foundation of technical discipline and course management precision and mental structure, and Trevino arrived with none of those things packaged in the way Irwin had packaged them and beat him anyway with a regularity that demanded some kind of explanation. Irwin said he never fully found the explanation, which told him something important about the limits of analytical frameworks when applied to competitors who operate outside the boundaries those frameworks were designed to describe. The final word. Lee Trevino said once that he never got nervous on a golf course because he had been nervous on a golf course for money he did not have when he was young, and that experience had used up whatever nervousness he had been allocated for his entire life. He said by the time he got to a major championship, the worst thing that could happen was he finished second and went home with enough money to live comfortably, and that was not a situation that produced genuine fear in a man who had started with a dirt floor and a taped-up club and nothing else. Every player in this story arrived at the same understanding through different experiences. Nicklaus and Watson and Player and Palmer and Irwin and Weiskopf and Floyd all competed against Trevino and came away carrying the same knowledge. Lee Trevino was not simply a great player who won 6 major championships against the best fields professional golf has ever assembled. He was a demonstration of what happens when a competitor is formed by circumstances that make the pressures of elite sport feel manageable by comparison, and then given enough talent to make that fearlessness count on the biggest stages the game has to offer.